Please.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you. Very impressed you're here on the time change Sunday, daylight saving time. Some of you know, but Calvary Church is indirectly responsible for this horrible thing. You've got to get up an hour earlier. Robert Garland was a parishioner at Calvary Church, and he is called the godfather of daylight saving time. And he is the person who worked at suggesting, cajoling, convincing for years. So it wasn't his idea. They'd done it in Europe and other places early as a time-saving thing, or I should say oil-saving thing, and then it was war, and let's just do this to have more daylight in the summer type of thing, and convince people, and then it stuck. So Robert Garland, there are a lot of wonderful old caricatures, comic strip type things in the Post-Gazette showing him wearing this big hat and like Mr. Time and all that. A year and a half ago, I was in Homewood Cemetery burying somebody and looked over and I said, "Is that the Robert Garland?" "Yes." And so I now know where Mr. Garland is buried in Homewood Cemetery as well, and still has relatives here in the congregation. So if you feel extra tired, give thankful for your local connection today of Mr. Garland. Would you pray for us, Rabbi?
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, God, source of the universe, who has enjoined us to engage with texts of meaning in Torah.
Now, any of you, if you have questions, feel free, because we missed last week, and we've been working through chapters 29, 30, and 31, which are leaner in content compared to some of the earlier ones of like Jacob's ladder and so on. This is Jacob going off to get the wives back in the old country so this covenant, this promise from God can continue. And we work through parts of 29 and 30, and if there are no pressing questions, what we hope to do is push through and just get past this part, which is important to read and know. And if you haven't heard the sermon today, it's about impatience. So I'm trying to appropriately, patiently move through this as quickly as possible that I can do. So any questions before we carry on? So if we look on chapter 30, the middle one, on the back of it, verse 25, we had heard about the two sisters, Rachel and Leah. "Oh, I have kids. Aren't they so wonderful? I have a bunch of kids. You don't have any." That competition. And so Jacob has been there for how many years at this point? 7 plus. And Rachel had born Joseph. Joseph is a key figure in the story, so just keep him in mind. When Rachel had born Joseph, Jacob, the dad of Joseph, said to Laban, his uncle, "Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Let me go back to where I'm from. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you," because that was the deal. I have to go serve you to get married to them, your daughters. "For you know very well the service I have given you." But Laban said to him, "If you will allow me to say so, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." What? What does that mean?
He has prospered from his word.
What's the divination? How did he learn? Basically, a little birdie told me. Or I've done some type of thrown the bones down and figured it out. I cast the dice. I did some thing he did to learn this, which is weird. It's just there in the story. There's no, not saying right or wrong. That's just what happened. I have learned, where did it go? "If you allow me, I've learned by divination the Lord has blessed me because of you." So Laban is no dummy, by the way. I'm getting rich because you're around. If you have that investment guy on your team, you want to keep him. If you have this great worker that's making you lots of money, you want to keep her. "So name your wages, name your salary, and I will give them to you," he said to Jacob. Is this an honest negotiation that's happening? No. Because what did Jacob do, for goodness sakes, before he was born? Grabbing onto his brother's heel, and then, remember, he steals his birthright by swindling his brother, and then he goes to get married, and then the uncle scam is a better word, scams him. Oh, you have to now work 7 more years. No one in this family is nice or decent. Remember that context. So if it seems like this is an upfront, honest negotiation, it's not. They're lying to each other incessantly. Name your wages, name your price, I'll give them. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you and how your cattle have fared with me. That is, your stock portfolio has gone up exponentially thanks to me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. Is this a paragon of humility? I am so awesome, you are lucky to have me, and you are now rich because of me. You're welcome, Laban. But now, when shall I provide for my own household? I need stock options. I need to own part of the company. I need to look after my own family. He said, what shall I give you? Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again feed your flock and keep it. When somebody says that, put your hand on your wallet. That's what's happening here. I will again feed your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages. Our rough modern-day equivalent would be, you've got this great stock portfolio. Let me just go through and pick out some for me. Basically at random, right? Even though that's what he does all day long, every day for years, is takes care of these animals. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, good, so I'm going to pick these things, and Laban agrees to this. Let it be as you have said. Fine. But that very day, Laban removed the male goats he took those out of his portfolio immediately. What complete jerks trying to out-scam each other. Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. So he removed them and put them someplace else. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, just in case those sheep or goats wandered away. They're never going to get intermingled again. 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. So, who's got the upper hand at this point? Laban, probably. But again, don't trust each other. Then, here's another weird divination magic thing. By the way, if you've ever been around sheep and goats, cows, this does not work, so don't try that. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the wood strips. He set the rods that he had peeled in front of the flocks and the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the rods. This would be like put a red stick, a green stick, and a blue stick or whatever. And if the sheep or goats came to breed in front of those, they would become that color. That's basically what's happening. Black or spotted or speckled. That makes no sense in farming techniques, husbandry techniques, but it does in the story. So just go with that. And so the flocks produced young that were striped, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and completely black animals in the flock of Laban, and he put his own droves apart and did not put them in Laban's flock. Here's the real key point. Whenever the stronger of the flock was breeding, Jacob laid the rods in the trough before the eyes of the flocks so that they might breed among the rods. But the feeble, the weak ones of the flock, he did not. So Jacob got the strong ones, Laban got the weak ones. Thus the man grew exceedingly rich and had large flocks and male and female slaves, camels, and donkeys. So they're both trying to get the upper hand, and at this point Jacob has the upper hand again because he took all the good stock, bred them, produced his own, left the weak, sickly, bad ones with Uncle Laban. Then what do you think has happened? This is what's the phrase for grumbling and gnashing of teeth in Hebrew? Do you remember?
The one we used this morning.
Yeah.
Ketzer nefesh.
Will you say that? What that is?
The verse that I delivered the sermon on is about having grown impatient, the Israelites on their journey, and the Hebrew phrase is ketzer nefesh, which means sort of a constriction of soul, or it's often translated as impatience, but
Impatient.
a loss of faith.
Loss of faith, grumbling. So not that exact phrase or word, but similar thing is happening here. Because if you saw Dad getting scammed out of all his stuff, and you're going to not get as big of an inheritance, be it money or goats and lambs and camels and the rest of it, and you saw this happening, how are you going to respond? You're going to be mad, and you're going to go beat him up, or have, we would say, I don't think they'd say this, but they'd have a come to Jesus talk with Jacob. Now Jacob heard the sons of Laban were saying, so Jacob hears the grumbling, Jacob has taken all that was our father's. He has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. Are the sons really concerned about the father, or are they concerned about themselves? Probably about themselves, maybe both. You don't want dad to be poor, you want him to be able to look after himself, but you really want to inherit, because there's sons, plural, they got to divide what dad has, less and less for them. So this interloper come in, it's great if you're going to marry off her sister, good, take her, but don't take all our stuff, just take her and go. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him favorably as he did before. Well, why would he? Because they're trying to scam each other, and he got the upper hand on him. Then the Lord said to Jacob, you should get out of town again. Return to the land of your ancestors and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Remind me, other than going to look for a wife, why is Jacob there in this land back east? He fled his brother Esau, who was going to probably kill him because he stole Esau's birthright, his whole future. Kind of like he was doing with his uncle and getting his wife. Stole, not all of it, but a big portion. How did you describe this? You go and make a mess and then leave? Yeah. He seems to be doing that again. I took all the stuff, I messed up this family life here with my own, so I better get way out of town, like, months' journey. And now he's done a similar thing where he's angered everybody, so I got to get out of town. You see the handwriting on the wall. By the way, where's that phrase come from, the handwriting on the wall?
I don't know.
Handwriting on the, you see God's handwriting on the wall. We'll cover that later. So he knows he's about to get in trouble again. And the story has a very descriptive device. When you know that you're about to be in trouble, God comes to you in a dream or a vision and says, you should leave. Perhaps that's his conscience, perhaps it's just God, who knows. Then the Lord said, return to the land of your ancestors, go back home, and I'll be with you. Which is, that continuity of relationship is important. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah, the two sisters that were wives, into the field where the flock was and said to them, I see that Dad doesn't regard me as favorably as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've served you with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me. Again. Changed my wages 10 times. So, daughters, you've heard this type of family conversation. Your father is the problem here. He's cheated me 10 times. He's tried to cheat me. But I've been all honest. I've worked as hard as I could. I've sacrificed for you. I've done my very best. And oh my God, so who do you side with, me or your father? That's part of what's happening. That's a psychological family dynamic more than a theological one. But you know that's also what he's asking. But God did not permit him to harm me, so God's protecting me from your dad. If he said the speckled sheep shall be your wages, then all the flock bore speckled. And if he said the stripe shall be your wages, then all the flock bore stripe. Thus God, so rather than me manipulating the mating practices of sheep and goats, not me, thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. What a brass ones this guy's got to say. God did this when clearly he was manipulating everything. Anybody going to disagree with that? This is our spiritual ancestor. I just want to keep repeating that.
You don't think he was justified?
Was he justified? Jacob, was he justified in his actions?
What happened to him? He never had to wait 7 years for the woman he loved, had to put up with Leah, even though he was alive.
So everybody could hear, thank you, Marlene. Wasn't he justified because he had to wait 7 years for the woman he loved, Rachel, and he had to put up with the other one, Leah, for the 7 years? I put up as, I don't know if I would use that verb, but yes. Abide, tolerate, get past, I guess all work. And this is not a loving, mutually supportive relationship. So was he justified? I wouldn't use that word. I could say it's understandable, but does one bad behavior justify another bad behavior? I would say no. Are they both modeling moral paragons of our spiritual ancestry? No. But again, that's where we come from. And Aaron's sermon today is wonderful, talking about impatience. The stories of the Bible are completely different contextually, but the feeling, the truth is still the same. And there's something going on here. Is he right for doing this? I don't think so. I don't think Laban's right either. But somehow God is still in the midst of this. Is it a design? What do you mean by design?
Well, I think God has something in mind, which we'll see later.
God has something in mind which we'll see later. So interesting question for your own worldview. How is God involved in all this? Because I think clearly that's part of the point. If in the whole scripture, this is what made it into the canon, this is the story, how is God involved in all this? Is God guiding the behavior of Jacob and Laban? I would say no, and I would say the arc of Scripture says also no. Is that right? How is God involved in all of this? Choosing the unlikely one might say, despite the people's best efforts to run away from God, God is still faithful. I was at Tree of Life Synagogue yesterday, and we were talking about Exodus. The Rabbi Jeff Myers and I were doing a Torah study as a part of the congregation, a part of the worship service. Ralph and Marlene were there. And it was fascinating. He says, you know what happens at the end of Exodus, right? I'd never thought of it that way. Is everybody justified? Do the people get the promised land? What happens? Is it crescendo, the guy gets the girl gets the guy, and they're rich, and the bad guy dies, and they all go off? No, it ends very weirdly. How does it end, Rabbi?
The book of Exodus.
Book of Exodus.
Tell us.
So the Israelites are delivered from slavery in Egypt. Bad Pharaoh. Everybody he's the enemy. The horse and rider gets crushed in the Red Sea when the Israelites cross on dry ground. And the whole way to the promised land, which is, again, not very far, is 40 years of griping and grumbling and everything. And even though God, we'll hear about it today, feeds them literally bread from heaven, and I delivered you, you were slaves in Egypt, and you didn't have water, you didn't have food, and I provided for all that. And then they complain so much, God says, here, have some poisonous snakes. Oh, wow, okay, that's much worse than being sent to your room for a while, and kills a bunch of them. But if you look on this pole with a snake on it, then you won't die. Whoa, wow, okay, so there are consequences. But the end of Exodus is the people who had been slaves for 40 years. Remember, 40 means 40 days, 40 nights, it means a while. For a long time, they wandered around, and they did not make it in the promised land. All those who left slavery, it was their children. And the question would be, why not? God still kept the divine promise. They made it eventually, but not those people. Why not? They set up idols, they grumbled. That's part of it, Tom.
They had been slaves.
They had been slaves. They never stopped thinking like slaves. They were still stuck. And the example of that, what's the we talked about that yesterday too. The golden calf story. So they're wandering around, they're journeying. And Moses goes up the mountain to get the 10 Commandments to hear from God. And while he's gone, he can't be gone that long. I mean, this is like going to Greensburg. It's not like going across the world. He went up the mountain, and he's walking, and he gets the commandments, and then God says, hey, Moses, great talk, but you need to go back down because they are, the phrase is running wild. So have you ever seen your kids run wild? Like, oh my God, they ate too much candy. Now they're just completely bonkers. They're running wild. And what did they do when Moses is gone too long? Hey, everybody give me all your gold, all your stuff. And the story, it's Aaron that does this, the biblical Aaron. The story is he threw the gold into the fire and a golden calf just jumped out of it. Oh, come on. Yes, that's exactly what happened. You made this. Why a calf? Because that represents the bull was the gods of Egypt. So he's gone for 5 minutes to go receive the 10 Commandments, and then the people fashion idols from when they were slaves. That's the point. They're looking back to the bondage in Egypt. They're still thinking like that. The people are not bad, but they're still enslaved in their mind, in their soul, even though they're bodily free. And their behavior all the way shows that. That was just a big symbolic action. So they don't, because of all these things, they're not ready, is the short answer. They're not ready to go in the promised land because they still are enslaved, whether they know it or not. So then they get stuck. Do you want to come in?
Well, only to say this. Do you remember, I remember learning from Harold Lewis, actually, from Robert Lovelace's poem To Althea, where the phrase is, stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. The idea that we can be trapped in a certain mode of thought or a certain place, metaphorically, in our lives, even though we may be released from that. And so the other way of saying this has been suggested that it was easy enough, allowing for a little bit of license, easy enough to take the Israelites out of Egypt. Harder still was taking Egypt out of the Israelites, right? That when we see ourselves in a bad circumstance, even though we may be released from that, an earlier household you were part of, or a relationship, or a job that didn't serve you well and you felt trapped or whatever, right? Even though you may be done with that relationship or that job or may no longer live in that place or in that way, very often we find ourselves thinking in the mindset of you can fill in the blank, of a slave, of a prisoner, of a whatever it may be. The other thing I would just jump in to add is that I believe that while we're not, let me back up. The reason these stories continue to resonate or are so timeless is because they're true, not because they happened, but because they happen again and again and again. That we're not identical with our biblical forebears. We're not identical with the characters in these stories, but neither would we be the same in their absence. And so being able to read their story, their family dynamic, or imagine what their motivations were for behaving in this way or the other, gives us an opportunity, which is what literature provides essentially, right? Or why we read biographies or other stories on other people's lives, so that we can appreciate, I'm not the first person to be confronted with this tension, or I'm not the first person to find myself in this circumstance, right? So as we read of others, in this case Jacob, Rachel, Leah, Laban, it resonates because we also are born into families we didn't choose, or enter into relationships that may have worked in this instance and no longer serve us as well in this circumstance. That's what I wanted to say about that. So.
We would now, thank you, we call this your family of origin issues, or you got baggage that you never really leave behind. So the Israelites never really left behind the experience in Egypt, like many of us never really leave behind the family thing mom and dad did, or a relationship, or some heartbreak or loss, or whatever it may be. One could make a case that Jacob keeps making the same mistakes over and over and over. I mean, they're basically at least similar, if not the same thing. He's having trouble connecting to people as more than a means to an end. Rachel seems to be the difference there. He seems to love her, but it's not, that's again the first instance of I love her, but it's not really clear how deep that is. So this is our spiritual forebear. So he says to his two wives, your father has tried to trick me and I'm moving on. During the mating of the flock, I once had a dream in which I'm on chapter 31, verse 10, in which I looked up and saw that the male goats that leaped upon the flock were striped, speckled, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. If God calls you in a dream, your answer is always, here I am. It happens with Samuel and various others. And he said, look up and see all the goats that leap on the flock are striped, speckled, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel. What does Bethel mean? House of God. Why reference Bethel?
El is God.
House of Beth-El. El's God, like Bethlehem. Bethlehem is house of bread. Who met there earlier? Jacob. So it's a connection. The same one that appeared to you before, same God. There's a continuity there. I'm the God of Bethel, the one you met before. Where you anointed a pillar. You poured oil in a rock, put up a pillar, made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and return to the land of your birth. Here I am, Lord. Then Rachel and Leah answered him. Notice, so we've got to leave all of your home and your family. And he tells his two wives this. And what's the first thing the two wives say? Is there any portion of our inheritance left to us from my father's house? How much money are we going to take? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? Hasn't Dad disowned us? For he has sold us. Is that fair to say that Laban sold his two daughters? Kind of, at least. He made Jacob work for 7 plus years and 7 plus years for both of them. Seems that way. All the property that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. So they're in on it with him now. Well, Dad's disowned us, but you've got all the money, and of course we love you, and wherever you say to go, we'll go. Now then, do whatever God has said to you. So Jacob arose, set his children and his wives on camels, drove away all his livestock and all the property he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired, to go to his father's Isaac in the land of Canaan. What is Canaan? The Holy Land, what we call the Holy Land. Back Babylon area in the east, or Iraq, back towards the Holy Land. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. What in the world? You already took his money, and he's out of the house. So what does it mean, his household gods? They're little statues of whatever the local deity would have been. So not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the God known to him in Bethel, but gods from the old country. Is this right?
Yes.
Well, she's doing the same thing the Israelites later do. Stuck to the old gods. And it gets weirder. Laban had gone to shear his sheep. Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean, and that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. Hey, I'm going to go out here for a while and do something, but I'm definitely not running away, so I'll see you later. So he fled with all that he had, starting out across the Euphrates, and set his face towards the hill country of Gilead. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So Laban took his kinsfolk with him and pursued him, a posse, for 7 days until he caught up with him in the hill country. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Don't harm him. Take heed that you say not a word to Jacob, either good or bad." Laban overtook Jacob. I just view this as a Western, where the group of guys are chasing after, and they're going through all the desert, and they're getting close, like, oh my God, we're not going to make it. We're just on a mule. We can't outrun them. And here they come. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsfolk camped in the hill country. Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? Because I've got my gun and all the other guys are with me, and we just outnumber you. You've deceived me, carried away my daughters like captives, like hostages. Why did you flee secretly and deceive me and not tell me? I would have sent you away." Now, is this true? If you had just come to me, I would have sent you away with mirth and songs. I would have had a party for you. Liar. "And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? You denied me the chance to bless my son, to kiss my daughter. Even though you had gone because you longed greatly for your father's house, why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force." Is Laban more concerned about the 2 wives, Laban's daughters, or all his money? I mean, you got all these sheep, you got the 2 wives. Which is more important? It's kind of hard to distinguish.
You remember the Jack Benny routine? Where he's being robbed, he says, "Your money or your life?" And Jack Benny doesn't respond very quickly, right? And he says, I'm thinking. Right.
"For I thought you would take your daughters from me by force, but anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsfolk, point out what I have is yours and take it." Now Jacob did not know his wife Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent, searched everything, tore it apart, and into the tent of the 2 maids, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. I mean, this is fantastic. Laban felt all about the tent. He looked all over the house, but did not find them. And she said to her father, this is in the Bible. The next slide. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. I'm menstruating. I can't get up." Oh, right, sorry. Oh, gross. So he searched but did not find the household gods. How clever is that to say? Then Jacob became angry and upbraided Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? See, you didn't find anything. You got nothing on me. What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? Although you have felt through all my goods, what have you found of your stuff?" Set it here before my kinsfolk and your kinsfolk, that they may decide. All the stuff I've stolen from you, put it out there, and you let these neutral parties decide. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and female goats have not miscarried. I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. That which was torn by wild beast I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. And on, these 20 years I've been in your house. I've served you for 14 for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. He's making his case. And now you accuse me. You wound me, Laban. You wound me for accusing me of all this. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac. Oh, I didn't notice that. The fear of Isaac. What does fear mean in the biblical sense? To fear the Lord? Respect, reverence, awe. Awe is probably the best translation we might have. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the awe of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction, Laban. God's on my side, not your horrible, God-forsaken side. And rebuked, God saw my affliction, the labor of your hands, and rebuked you last night. Now, rebuke is a word that we don't use nearly enough, don't you think? God has rebuked him because clearly I am right. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do today about these daughters of mine or about their children whom they have borne? It's like that you are your mother's son. I don't like any of you. Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, because if God is on Jacob's side, what chance does Laban have? Let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone, set it up as a pillar, and Jacob said to his kinfolk, gather stones, took the stones, made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. So they're ritualizing their covenant, their peace deal. Therefore he called it Gilead, the pillar Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watched between you and me when we were absent one from another. If you ill-treat my daughters, or if you take wives in addition to my daughters, though no one else is with us, God is watching you. That's a kind of threat at the end of it. So I'm not going to pursue you anymore.
So are there other thoughts or questions that you have just now? I just want to share an idea. So, yeah, please, Alison.
I'm wondering why all this emphasis on the speckled sheep and what in the story of the Bible, what were the people that were taking this down thinking this was going to teach us? Because it's awful bad sheep herding.
Right. Right. It shows a complete lack of understanding of genetics and animal husbandry and...
The shepherd that left his flock and went off and got the lost sheep, that makes a lovely story, but that's very bad sheep herding. I'm wondering what is the purpose of all of that? Because it takes away from, the main thrust of what we're supposed to be learning.
Which is what? What do you believe the main thrust is?
Well, usually you think the Bible has a reason and a message for this, but it's all the speckled sheep and the goats and all this kind of stuff.
Seems to be a distraction.
Why?
Okay. Why? What is this notion about speckled sheep and spotted?
I thought they were less valuable. The white sheep are what they want. Or anyway.
That's how I read it too. That if you were going to divide up a herd of cattle or is it a herd of sheep? Yeah, flock of sheep. That's right. A flock of sheep, right? How would you go about it? Well, you pick one and I'll pick one. You pick one, I'll pick one, in that way, right? You divide them in half. You take the bigger half and I'll take the smaller half, right? Those are some of our favorite oxymorons: big half, small half, right? It could be I don't know, shirts and skins, right? Yeah.
It has to do with purity.
Purity, right? Certainly we know later among the priesthood there are physical characteristics that disqualify you from serving as a priest or that which, the animal that can be offered for sacrifice. And if you're speckled or you're blemished, or it suggests you're less valuable. Right, yes?
On the practical side of it, up until recently, spotted sheep were less desirable because it was more work to spin the wool. You had to separate the colors.
Oh, that's interesting. Everyone catch that? That speckled sheep, spotted sheep were less valuable because in actually harvesting the wool, but having to comb out the various colored fibers, they were more work, they were less valuable than was a sheep of pure white. That's nice. Jeffrey, we got
This is totally flippant, but I think that God put those things in the story to throw fundamentalists like Allison off the track.
so a spotted sheep is a red herring.
Right. Sometimes a cigar.
Yeah. Is it, it is, I know that many American Christians have been taught this. What does it mean to say that we should go to the Bible looking for what's the point? Is that how the Bible was conceived and written? I don't think it really was. Not as, remember last year we talked about, well, what's the point of this parable of Jesus? In effect, it domesticates the story and doesn't allow the story to speak on its own. It's not necessarily a one, well, this symbol means that. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't necessarily. This was probably what was happening in this weird family dynamic. And tell me in your life, have you ever got caught up in something utterly ridiculous, or it's highly detailed, and it's, well, you know, you really had to be there, trying to explain why we're so caught up over speckled and mottled and all the rest of the sheep. It's because it's a weird family situation. I don't know if there's one point from this other than to say how God has been active all through this completely dysfunctional family relationship. And if God is active through the dysfunctional relationship of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, and then all of the Israelites, well, maybe God can work even through our horrible family decisions and weird dynamics. I would say that'd be an overarching salvation history point, if you will. But don't necessarily look for a point. There are lots of points of connection. It's like Aaron, I've quoted you many times, by the way, is God everywhere? Why not say God is anywhere? God could be anywhere in this story. And it appears differently how it speaks to you or a people over time. What else? There were several other hands. Oh, that's interesting. Are Rachel and Leah upset, mad at Dad because they should have some form of a dowry? And did Rachel steal the household gods as a way of getting back at Dad? I hadn't thought of that. That's a really interesting interpretation. It would make sense. Wasn't she mad anyway because she had to wait an extra 7 years? My answer would be probably. And mad at her sister? Well, she should be mad at her sister. She did a little more than take her boyfriend. She married him and then had several kids and then said, "Look at my beautiful children." Oh, sorry, you have other talents that you can do. That's a great point.
Nice one too.
Taking the household gods as a way of saying, I can't leave my past behind. I need to take something of me with me. Is that right? Yeah, great point.
It's very typical. It's why he has those gods. They're trying to hedge their bets, but they know they're chosen. They know they're different, but they're also hedging their bets. That this is how everybody in this
That's a good. They're hedging by taking the household gods, which you could say so were the Israelites in the desert. They were hedging their bets. Yeah, I mean, this God of Israel that delivered us from slavery and gave us food and water and got rid of our enemies, but just in case, because that God led us out of there, we need to make sure we're like good with everybody. Maybe that's also happening. I mean, everybody has mixed motives. Remember that. It's not this one pure thing. Everybody's a mix of a lot of things. Who had their hand up? Susie?
Well, I'm wondering if God doesn't get a little confused about who he is.
God get confused about who he is?
You know, by the people who worship him being a little confused about.
I would say maybe
We try to
people
make
get
him
confused.
do what we want him to do. So maybe there is no God up there. Maybe it's just a whole bunch of theses. You know, my group thinks this and my group thinks that. And
Yeah. I do think it's pretty clear from the story that a lot of people are not really sure. And remember, this is what is happening that it's hard for us to see because it's so obvious to us now. When we talk about the Christian God, is it the same God that Aaron might have? All of us would say yes. And what about when the Imam was here? Allah means the God. Yeah, it's the same God. Most people in the history of the world would not have thought that at all. There was a God, for various, without going into it too far, there were gods for different elements or facets of nature, or some were connected to a place like a spring or well, and other ones were connected to this, and they had certain functions, and they were much more human-like, anthropomorphic. The Greeks, the Romans are good examples, or the Babylonians and all these other local tribes. Well, basically, my dad can beat up your dad, type of thing, is what's going on. Or the toughest kid on the block. And the gods were localized or for a people. And what's developing is what we later call monotheism, that there is, in fact, one God. That is not what is the case here. What, monolatry? How would you describe that?
So, in this ancient world, let's allow this story, over and above about Jacob and Rachel, Leah, and Laban, is a story that the original hearers, right, or readers would recognize as a battle of gods, if you will. Remember, Jacob goes to Laban in the country in which he and his daughters live, precisely because he's family. And yet, within this family, they have these idols, right? These small gods that Rachel's able to secret out of the house, put under her saddlebag, and she sits on them. Yes? And we know the God of Jacob, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is stronger than that God, or is bigger than that God, such that this is a God to whom Laban also listens. Right? But it's a sort of a battle of the gods. And what we think of anachronistically as monotheism in Genesis is actually the word Jonathon just referenced was monolatry, which is a belief in one God among many gods, which is no longer how we understand what monotheism means today. Now we understand monotheism to mean that there is one God. And at Calvary, you address that God with these names and these words and in this way. And at the Islamic Center or at the Jewish congregation, different words, different language, but same God, one God. Which then puts us in a situation where someone says, well, God told me to strap a dynamite to my chest and blow ourselves up. You say, no, you misunderstand God. Right? It's rather paternalistic. Right? Because we're committed to this idea that there's only one God, if your understanding of that God tells you to do something, then you're off base. It's not that you follow a different God. Does that make sense? So we think of monotheism as we're all worshiping the same God, the one God, howsoever we reference this God, versus everyone having their own God for whatever you need. Fertility, fire, war, agriculture, animal husbandry, whatever it might have been. And so essentially, Laban's gods, or these small gods, are the ones that Rachel's not willing to do without, or is frightened to leave behind, because better to hedge your bets, right, is a God that's bested, or are gods, small g, plural, gods that are bested by the God of Israel. That comes through in this story also.
Yeah. One could say, and especially these early stories in Genesis, what's the very first thing that God did in the book? Create the heavens and the earth. So there's a sense of this cosmic universality, but then it gets, after chapter 11, very local again, with this guy, Abraham, and then the set of people, and the family story. And so it's all, if you could think of this, have any of you heard of Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey? Like Luke Skywalker, the whole Star Wars, the early part anyways, the arc of you go and you leave home and you discover who you are and you deal with your father and fight the bad guy and so on. You could make the case a very similar dynamic is happening with what we call God. So there's the big universal thing, and then it's right back to, well, the miracles are not that big if you think about it. Some of the stuff going on early in the stories. There's dreams and there's vision, and then a little bit of, I give you the upper hand in this argument. Then you get more and more stories where God is on a journey of self-discovery, or you could say the people's understanding of who this God is growing and emerging from just a local farm team to the God of everything. And so it depends on how you look at it. And this story is a really good example of that early arc of who God is or who God is becoming. Now, does God change? According to the Greek worldview, no. That's like Book of John. But according to the biblical, the Semitic, the Hebrew, yes. God is moved by human compassion. That's so, just as a little aside, Christians have this weird dynamic of having a Greek view of God and a Hebrew view of God and kind of smushing them together, and it doesn't always make sense sometimes. Is God moved by human suffering? God is unchangeable. God is all-powerful. Those are very Greek ideas. Of course God is moved by suffering because God is connected to humanity innately as creatures. Those are not compatible ideas that we have smushed together. It's not a biblical word, smushed, by the way. We have made into a composite of a deity that is actually not scriptural, but we imagine that to be the case. It's our developing understanding of God. Any last things before Aaron goes to preach a wonderful, dynamic sermon? Jeffrey.
I just want to apologize if there's a fundamentalist in this room. It's me. Anyone who doesn't know Allison is more far away from being a fundamentalist.
Alice, so I heard you say Allison is basically a heretic, not a fundamentalist. I concur wholeheartedly. Okay, thank you all very much.